Here's the actual anatomy of Messi's income today, and it's worth walking through piece by piece because each layer works differently. First, the base football contract. Call it the floor, not the ceiling, roughly $20 million guaranteed a year from Inter Miami. Second, endorsements, the classic athlete income stream, still enormous, still real. Adidas alone is worth an estimated $20–25 million a year under a lifetime deal signed in 2017, one of only a handful of forever boot contracts in the sport's history. Layer on PepsiCo, Mastercard, Budweiser, Lay's, Hard Rock International, and a Saudi Tourism Authority ambassadorship, reportedly worth up to $25 million over 3 years, for things as specific as $2 million a year for a single-family vacation, and $2 million for social posts. And you get an endorsement. Portfolio Forbes and other trackers estimate at somewhere around $60–70 million annually. Third, and this is the layer nobody's paycheck-based mental model prepares you for, revenue sharing. Not a fee, a share of the actual profit pool. Messi's Inter Miami deal ties him directly into MLS's national broadcast contract with Apple TV, giving him an undisclosed cut of MLS Season Pass subscription revenue, plus a share of Adidas's merchandise profits tied to the league. One industry lawyer called the Apple piece unprecedented. No athlete in any American sport had ever been wired directly into a streaming platform's subscriber growth before. Fourth, equity. Messi holds an option to buy an ownership stake in Inter Miami itself once he retires, with no buy-in required, and in the time since he arrived, the club's valuation has climbed from roughly $585 million to somewhere near $1.45 billion. That's not a number on a pay stub. That's appreciation on an asset he hasn't even taken possession of yet. You'd assume a boot deal and a jersey number are where the real leverage lives. Actually, ownership is where it lives. And Messi didn't get real ownership until the very end of his playing career, which tells you something about how rare that kind of deal is, even for the greatest player alive. It's worth sitting with how genuinely unusual this contract structure is, because it didn't exist as a template before Messi signed it. Sports lawyers who studied the deal called it a generational type thing, not a bigger version of a normal athlete contract, but a different species of contract. Most star athletes, no matter how famous, are paid through some combination of salary, signing bonus, and a handful of independent endorsement deals negotiated on the side. What Miami and MLS built instead was a single web of interlocking incentives. The league's own broadcast partner and the league's own kit partner both agreed, in advance, to hand over a slice of their own growth to one player, on the bet that his mere presence would grow the pie enough to make everyone's slice bigger. Inter Miami had actually laid the groundwork 2 years earlier, writing something called a Ballon d'Or escalator clause into its sponsorship contracts, a provision that automatically doubled a sponsor's fee if the club ever signed a 5-time Ballon d'Or winner, a qualification that, at the time, exactly 2 humans on the planet met. That's not opportunism. That's a front office pre-building the machine before it had any idea whether the moment would ever come. Imagine you're the best player who has ever touched a football. 8 Ballon d'Ors sitting on a shelf. A World Cup won in the desert, on your own terms, in the last chapter anyone thought you had left. Stadiums across 2 continents selling out just because your name is on the team sheet. Now imagine that none of that, the trophies, the free kicks, the number 10 shirt, is actually the biggest driver of your fortune anymore. Imagine that the man who scored more career goals than almost any player alive makes more money from a streaming app, a beverage giant, and a real estate portfolio than he ever did from a single contract to kick a ball. That's not a hypothetical. That's just what it now means, financially, to be Lionel Messi. You'd assume the money is in the football. It is, but less than you'd think, and less predictably than you'd think. Over more than 2 decades as a professional, Messi has earned somewhere around $1.6 billion in salary alone across Barcelona, PSG, and Inter Miami. That sounds like the whole story. It isn't. His current MLS playing contract the actual standard player. Contract filed with the league. Pays a base salary of $12 million and guaranteed compensation of about 20.5 million dollars a year. On a 17 or 80 million a year total package, that means the majority of what Messi earns right now isn't a salary at all. It's something else entirely. A cut of other people's businesses. So, where did the machine start? Not with equity. With leverage he didn't have. Messi signed his first professional contract with Barcelona as a teenager, reportedly on a napkin, after the club agreed to pay for the growth hormone treatment his family couldn't afford in Argentina. That deal wasn't built to make a kid rich. It was built to keep a promising asset from walking to another club. For years afterward, Messi was one of the best-paid players in the sport. But he was still, structurally, an employee cashing a paycheck. Extraordinary money, ordinary structure. The pivot from employee to owner didn't happen at Barcelona. It happened at the end of his career in Miami, and it's the single most important financial decision of his adult life. Now zoom out from the paycheck entirely, because underneath all of that is a genuine business empire. Ventures Messi owns or co-owns outright, not brands renting his face. There's MiM Hotels, a boutique chain launched in 2017 with Spain's Majestic Hotel Group, now spanning 6 properties across Sitges, Ibiza, Mallorca, Baquera, Sotogrande, and Andorra, with management folded into Meliá Hotels International, a portfolio reportedly worth well over $100 million. There's Mass Plus by Messi, a sports drink brand launched in 2024. There's the Messi Store, a lifestyle and apparel label. There's 525 Rosario, a media and production company he launched in 2024 as a joint venture with the entertainment studio Smuggler. There's a wine label produced through a Swiss winemaking partner, Winemaker. There's a stake in the Argentine restaurant chain El Club de la Milanesa. And there's Playtime Sports, a Silicon Valley investment vehicle he backs alongside the entrepreneur behind Viki, the streaming platform that sold to Rakuten for $200 million, through which Messi has quietly become an investor in football-adjacent tech startups most fans have never heard of. Add luxury real estate across Miami, Barcelona, Ibiza, and Rosario, and you've got a property and business portfolio reportedly worth hundreds of millions on its own, sitting entirely separate from anything he does on a pitch. Look at the shape of that list for a second, because it's not random. It's a portfolio built the way a private equity investor builds one, not the way most athletes build one. Most retired stars end up as a face on a restaurant or a name on a fragrance, a licensing arrangement where someone else does the actual building and pays for the privilege of using the name. Messi's ventures skew toward genuine ownership stakes in operating businesses, a hotel group with real estate and real guests, a media company producing actual content, a venture fund writing actual checks into other companies. The MiM Hotels chain, for instance, isn't Messi's face on someone else's building. Majestic Hotel Group built and operates the properties. But Messi holds an ownership interest in the venture itself, which is why the portfolio's value moves with hotel occupancy and property appreciation, not with how many magazine covers he's on that month. That's a meaningfully different bet than a jersey sponsorship. And it's the same instinct that shows up in Playtime Sports, where Messi isn't lending his name to a fund. He's a backer of a fund that then goes and picks other companies to bet on, meaning his upside there is layered 2 deals deep from anything happening on a football pitch. Here's why that distinction, owning versus being paid, actually matters financially, and it's worth pausing on the mechanism. A fee is a transaction. You perform a service, you get a check, the relationship resets to 0. Equity is a claim on the future. You own a percentage of something, and if that something grows, your slice grows with it, with no additional labor required. Picture the difference between being paid to paint a house and owning a percentage of the house. 10 years from now, the paycheck for painting is long spent. The percentage of the house is still yours, and the house might be worth 3 times as much. That's the entire logic behind why Messi's Inter Miami equity option, an asset that costs him nothing to hold and appreciates whether he's on the field or not, is arguably worth more to his long-term net worth than any single season of salary. But none of this has run without turbulence, and the honest version of this story includes a real, well-documented setback. In 2016, a Barcelona court found Messi and his father, Jorge, guilty of 3 counts of tax fraud, ruling they'd used a network of shell companies in Uruguay, Switzerland, and Belize to underreport roughly $4.1 million in income from Messi's image rights between 2007 and 2009. Messi was handed a 21-month suspended sentence, standard leniency in Spain for first-time, non-violent offenses under 2 years, along with a $2 million fine, on top of more than $5 million he and his father had already repaid before the trial. He appealed and lost with Spain's Supreme Court, upholding the conviction in 2017. Picture a load-bearing wall in a house that nobody notices is cracked until an inspector points a flashlight at it. The house doesn't fall down, but the fix is expensive and the reputation of the builder takes a permanent public hit. That's roughly what the case did. It didn't derail Messi's brand or trigger the morals clause exits that sponsors sometimes invoke for scandal. But it was a real, costly reminder that even the best-paid athlete on the planet can get the plumbing of his own finances wrong when he hands the wiring to someone else. In this case, his own family's advisors. Zoom out further, and you can see the loop that makes all of this compound rather than simply add up. Fame drives brand value. Brand value drives sponsorship and equity opportunities. Equity and business ownership generate income that isn't tied to performance on a given Sunday. And that income funds a lifestyle and a media presence that, in turn, keeps the fame from decaying. A documentary here. A stadium-shattering appearance there. A tourism campaign that puts his face in front of markets he's never played in. It's a flywheel. The Apple TV revenue share exists because his arrival in Miami drove MLS subscriber growth. The subscriber growth exists because his fame drew eyeballs. The fame stays elevated partly because deals like the Apple one keep him visible on a platform millions of people open every week. Each piece feeds the next one. That's why his financial trajectory looks less like a salary curve and more like compound interest. If you want a single moment that captures the whole machine clicking into place, look at the summer of 2023. Messi's PSG contract was expiring. Saudi Arabia had reportedly offered him a deal worth as much as $1.6 billion over 3 years to join the Saudi Pro League, more money, in raw terms, than almost anything in the sport's history. He turned it down. Instead, he signed with Inter Miami, a club that, at the time, was near the bottom of the MLS table and valued at roughly $585 million. The headline salary was a fraction of the Saudi number, but bundled into the deal were the Apple revenue share, the Adidas profit share, and that no-cost future ownership option. 2.5 years later, Inter Miami's valuation has roughly doubled to somewhere near $1.45 billion. MLS's Apple partnership has become a case study in sports broadcasting, and Jorge Mas, the club's co-owner, has publicly confirmed Messi's total annual package now sits at $70 to $80 million, of which only about $20 million is guaranteed salary. Messi effectively chose a smaller guaranteed number and a bigger slice of upside, and the upside has, so far, paid off spectacularly. It's the clearest real-world test yet of the difference between getting paid and getting ownership. Widen the timeline a little further, and the case study gets even more instructive, because it wasn't just a 2.5-year story. It's still unfolding. By early 2026, Inter Miami's co-owner was confirming publicly that the club's revenue had grown roughly 350% since Messi's arrival, driven substantially by a new stadium project and by sponsorship contracts that, thanks to those pre-written escalator clauses, doubled in value the moment Messi put pen to paper. Picture a small regional bank suddenly landing a client who's Deposits alone are bigger than the bank's entire existing balance sheet. That's roughly the scale of the shock. Messi's signature sent through a single MLS, franchises finances. The club that gambled on writing contractual clauses for a hypothetical superstar. It might never actually land, ended up being the only team positioned to capture the full value the moment that superstar became available. That's not luck. That's what it looks like when preparation and opportunity actually do meet, a rarer thing in business than the cliché makes it sound. So what happens from here? And this is where the two futures genuinely diverge. The bull case is straightforward. Inter Miami's valuation keeps climbing as the new stadium comes online, and MLS's media deals mature. Messi's equity option becomes one of the more lucrative second acts any athlete has ever negotiated. MiM Hotels and 525 Rosario grow into durable post-playing businesses, and the Messi name becomes a genuine holding company, brand that outlives his playing career entirely, closer to what a handful of the biggest entertainment or fashion names have managed than what athletes have traditionally achieved. The bear case is just as real, and it comes back to a single structural vulnerability. Almost everything in this empire, the endorsements, the revenue shares, the value of the equity itself, still traces back to one perishable asset, which is Messi's own continued relevance. Athletes retire. Bodies age out of the game years before the mind wants to. Attention fades even for legends once they're no longer playing. And MLS's Apple and Adidas partnerships were built around his active playing presence, not a retired ambassador's. If the equity conversion at retirement is less favorable than hoped, or if the businesses he's diversified into, hotels, drinks, media, don't scale the way the football did, the empire could end up worth a fraction of the headline estimates that get thrown around today, which already range anywhere from roughly $850 million to $1.1 billion, depending on whose assumptions you use for the private stakes. There's a second, quieter version of the bear case worth naming too, and it's less about Messi personally and more about the model he's riding. Revenue-sharing deals like the Apple and Adidas arrangements only work as long as the underlying platforms keep growing. A subscription service can renegotiate or restructure its programming priorities. A league's media rights can be rebid to a different partner entirely, and an equity stake in a single club is still exposure to one team, in one city, in one league, rather than a diversified position. Picture owning a percentage of a single restaurant instead of a chain. It can be the best restaurant in the city, but a kitchen fire, a bad lease renewal, or a change in neighborhood foot traffic hits you in a way it wouldn't if your stake were spread across 50 locations. None of that means the bet is a bad one. It means the holding company framing has real concentration risk baked into it, even if it looks from the outside like diversification. Which gets at the real reframe here. Strip away the jersey and the free kicks, and Lionel Messi today isn't really best described as a footballer with some side investments. He's closer to a diversified holding company, hotels, beverages, media production, tech investments, and a growing equity stake in a major sports franchise that happens to still show up on Saturdays and put a ball in the net better than anyone else alive. The fantasy was always about watching him play. The actual economics were about him learning, late but decisively, to stop just being paid for the game and start owning a piece of everything the game built around him.